Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grayson. This is the KMG Show for Wednesday, December the 22nd, 2021. Some of you may have noticed, if you were on Twitter today, that this phrase, the Great Reset, was at the top because Twitter and Reuters wanted to tell us something about the Great Reset. What might that be? Well, the Great Reset, it's nothing to worry about. It's just a bunch of good people, good forward-looking people trying to make the world a better place. And you'd have to be a misogynist, misanthrope to be against that sort of thing. Now, this is amusing because we had been told for quite some time that there was no such thing as the Great Reset, that this was a conspiracy theory, notwithstanding the fact that a whole bunch of world leaders, not just from the World Economic Forum, like its founder and executive chairman, Klaus Schwab, used this, but this phrase associated with the Great Reset, build back better. Well, Joe Biden wants to build back better, and Justin Trudeau wants to build back better, and Boris Johnson wants to build back better. Sounds like this is kind of important, doesn't it? What does build back better mean? Well, it means we're not going back to the world before COVID-19. That world is overdone, finished with, and good riddance. And what kind of world do we have to look forward to? Well, there is a piece that came out on Forbes, no less, and it was written by a woman called Ida Auken, described as a member of the Danish parliament. Yes, young global leader and member of the Global Future Council on Cities and Urbanization of the World Economic Forum. So this is legit. And it's from November 10th, 2016, just a little over 5 years ago. Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better because people hate owning things. In fact, they don't want to own anything. And privacy, yuck. Privacy is just so 20th century. It begins, welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. It might seem odd to you. Yeah, that's putting it mildly, but it makes perfect sense for us in this city. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. And who's going to provide that service? We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need in our daily lives. One by one, all these things became free. So it ended up not making sense for us to own much. So this is a kind of reboiled socialism, is it? Now, not owning anything, including any appliances or any clothes, is clearly deranged. Okay? Oh, in our city, we don't pay any rent because someone else is using our free space whenever we do not need it. That's going to work so perfectly. I can't imagine, any kind of difficulties. My living room is used for business meetings when I am not there. Again, how could there be any conflict? Once in a while, I will choose to cook for myself. Oh, once in a while. It is easy. The necessary kitchen equipment is delivered at my door within minutes. Since transport became free, we stopped having all those things stuffed into our home. Why need a pasta maker and a crepe cooker crammed into our cupboards? We can just order them when we need to. Again, stark raving mad. Currently, in the nightmarish world in which we live, people who like fresh pasta have a pasta maker. Or even if they, buy pasta, which is pre-made, well, they need tools to boil it and to strain it or whatever. And we're supposed to believe that every time someone, once in a while, who chooses to cook for himself or herself, they'll just order it, and then it'll be collected, and then it will be taken to some place where it will be cleaned and sterilized. And they will do this over and over again on a monstrous scale. When products are turned into services, no one has an interest in things with a short lifespan. Everything is designed for durability, repairability, and recyclability. Yes, and when you have a bunch of anonymous people on a monstrous scale in charge of everything that you do and everything that you use, well, nothing can go wrong there, because obviously these people would care just as much about your crepe maker or pasta maker as you would, right? Because that's how the world works. Because I don't know, we've returned to the Garden of Eden or something like this. Yeah, nothing threatening about this vision of the future, huh? Nothing threatening at all. I mean, again, what sort of misanthrope would be put off by this? But as I say, if you go to Twitter this morning, you'll find out we're being informed by Twitter and Reuters what the Great Reset means. And what does that tell me? What should that tell you? These people are scared. They have spent, I don't know, a year and a half or more saying the Great Reset. There's no such thing as the Great Reset, even after Klaus Schwab wrote and published a book last year, in the spring of last year, called COVID-19, The Great Reset, in which we learned that no, the world is over. We're going to ground zero, just like they did in France after 1789, and just like they did in Cambodia in 1975. And we see how well that worked out. Oh, and we find out, for instance, that if these things that are being said about the Great Reset, for instance, oh, yes, this rather worrying correspondence between the government of the Netherlands and the World Economic Forum, what Great Reset, Great Reset, Great Reset, Great Reset. Oh, this is not in context. It doesn't have the proper context. And the proper context is that these people are our betters. And if they say they're going to turn the world upside down and start from zero, then we had better let them do it. Oh, yes, to usher in the fourth industrial revolution. Now, if you go to the Wikipedia entry, which is pretty good, until you get to the subject called conspiracy theory. The Great Reset conspiracy theory suggests that some world leaders planned and executed the COVID-19 pandemic in order to take control of the world economy. Well, I alluded to this yesterday, what they call the fallacy of the excluded middle. It is not necessary to believe that COVID-19 was planned and executed by bad people. One doesn't necessarily have to believe that, because it's possible that certain people, certain politically minded people, took advantage of a crisis. Okay? But, okay, so who are these crazies? Well, there's Candace Owen, Glenn Beck, Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson, Paul Joseph Watson, Ben Sixsmith, Pauline Hanson, James Delling-Pole, etc., etc., etc. So anyone who has any difficulty with the Great Reset is crazy and evil. Oh, and guess who's behind all this? Oliver Cam. Yes, of course. Of course, he was. He be behind all this. Quote, the propaganda apparatus of the Putin regime has for many months published wild allegations from obscure bloggers that the Great Reset is a code for oligarchs to amass wealth and control populations. Well, Paul Joseph Watson is not an obscure blogger. to give one example. James Delingpole is not an obscure blogger, neither is Tucker Carlson. But, once again, our betters know what is best for us. So that thing that isn't happening, the Great Reset, it's good that it is. The most important illustration in the world, well, I put it up on Twitter, my Twitter feed, at KMG Victoria, where you can see it. We have been sold a bill of goods, and the price is needless, endless panic, the destruction of our societies, and the rape of our economies. And this is from John Ioannidis and Catherine Axfors. Mortality risk, COVID-19, chances of dying of COVID-19 by age group with comparable overall odds to the population. Age 0 to 19, 99.997 survival rate. That is similar to the odds of dying from a sharp object. Age group 20 to 29, 99.986 survival rate, similar to the odds of dying from sunstroke. 30 to 39, 99.969 survival rate, similar to the odds of dying from choking on food. When you're looking at 99.9 and higher survival rate, the risk of death is pretty much statistical static. From 40 to 49, 99.92, similar to the odds of dying of drowning. From 50 to 59, the survival rate is 99.73, similar to the odds of dying in a pedestrian accident. Now, let's talk about old people. From 60 to 69, a 99.4 survival rate, similar to the odds of dying in a car crash. Are we all that worried about dying in car crashes? No, clearly we are not, because if we were, we wouldn't get into cars. Well, not moving ones. And let's look at really old people, 70 plus, a 97.6 survival rate, a 1 in 41 odds of dying, similar to the odds of dying of chronic respiratory disease. This is what people 70 and older die of, if not from cancer, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. They die of chronic respiratory disease. There are the mortality rates. Does this seem that these data should lead to us running around with our hair on fire? No, obviously not. Obviously not. And here is an essay from Guinevere Newton from the Brownstone Institute called "The COVID Morass: An Academic and Mother Ask Questions." Yes, what is the risk here? Well, it seems that people, or that is to say, the mass of people, have a strange idea about what the risk is. That is to say, they think that it is much higher than it actually is, many times much higher. And this is rather similar. To what we see with other propaganda or agitprop movements. For instance, how many Black people are there, say, in the United States? Well, we hear figures of 30 to 50% regularly from polls that it's actually around 12.5. What is the percentage of homosexuals in the American population? We hear 25, 30% when it is closer to 2%. But this is what propaganda does to us. I have never claimed, I don't consider myself to be an anti-vaxxer. I just have some problems with a couple of them. And I do not consider myself to be anti-science. I consider myself to be rather skeptical, actually. However, unlike most of the people that I read on Twitter and many of the so-called experts, I can actually understand numbers higher than 999. Whereas, and I can understand even big numbers like 3 million, which is the typical number of people who die in the United States every year, and 330 million people, which is the estimated population of the United States. So when we see the numbers ascribed to COVID-19 in the United States, and particularly in, say, in individual Canadian provinces, it doesn't seem all that much, does it? Considering that over 26,000 people died in 2019, the last full year before COVID showed up on the scene. Yeah. So as I say, we have been sold a bill of goods. 90% of U.S. respondents in a recent study thought that the death rate from COVID is more than 10%, which is well over 100 times the actual rate for most age groups. Americans greatly overestimate the risk for younger people. They report that around 8% of COVID deaths are in those aged 24 and younger, even though the proportion of deaths in this group is less than 0.5%. On the other hand, they underestimate the proportion of deaths in those aged 65 and up. This perceptual inaccuracy is important. It speaks to the success of the public health message of a one-size-fits-all solution. But it also conveys an inability to accurately assess the true health risks from COVID at both the individual and population levels. Clearly, older people are at a much higher risk of serious outcomes from a COVID infection. Similarly, COVID disproportionately affects people with other health problems known as comorbidities. A recently published study in the journal Infectious Disease Reports analyzed data from public health websites of 50 states. It was found that 92.8% of COVID deaths were associated with pre-existing comorbidities. These include pre-existing heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, coexisting infections, cancer, respiratory system diseases, and renal disorders. Now, as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. points out on his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and as I have been pointing out in this space since, February of last year, this is eerily similar to what happened with AIDS. Right from the very beginning, from anyone who was paying attention to the actual data, the people who were dying of AIDS were male homosexuals, IV drug users, and those unfortunates who were given tainted blood by organizations such as the Canadian Red Cross. No one else had anything to worry about. Guess who told us that everyone had to worry about it, that AIDS was everyone's disease? Well, one of those people was Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci actually suggested, or more than that AIDS could be spread by casual contact. Now, this is the sort of grievous error that one might have thought would have ended Fauci's career, but strangely enough, it didn't. Circa 1985 or 1986, the World Health Organization was saying that by the year 2000, something like 105% of the world's population would have AIDS. And there were a few skeptical voices, like the brave American journalist Michael Fumento, and there was a concerted effort to destroy him after he wrote a book called The Myth of Heterosexual AIDS. Now, we all know it's a myth now, but it took a long time for that to happen. And people were scared to death. I mean, how many of them literally scared to death? I can't say, but I'm sure it's a not insignificant number. Let's take a look at the COVID headlines from the New York Times. COVID live updates, Omicron cases appear less severe, 2 UK studies say. But we can't give up the panic just yet. Can't give it up. The variant is motivating Americans to get boosters. The boosters don't do anything. They don't. It's just the same drug as jab number 1 and jab number 2. 2 new studies suggest that the Omicron infections more often result in mild illness compared with previous variants, offering hope that the current surge may not be quite as catastrophic as feared, despite skyrocketing caseloads in much of the world. What you've heard is a qualified good news study. Dr. Jim McMenamin, incident director for COVID-19 at Public Health Scotland, said at a news briefing, oh, qualified good news story. No, it's just a good news story. Where are the Omicron cases in ICU? Well, Dr. Kieran Moore, who is really good at panic porn, admitted in his news briefing today in Ontario, zero. That's how many. And this is, again, can't give up the panic, because, who knows what would happen if we gave up the panic. Maybe we wouldn't have the Great Reset. Maybe we could go back to the way the world was. Instead, in Quebec and coming in Ontario, I guess, and in my own province of British Columbia, no, punish me harder, mommy. Are there still activities which people are allowed to do? Even double vaccinated people? Well, we're going to stop that. And by the way, best to cancel Christmas. And once again, I will suggest that these people calling on us to cancel Christmas, I'm suspecting that a great many of them are atheists or even God haters. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth, Dan, Anran, William Hicks, Paul Casso, 88. Something, a Gamiston. Yeah, who says, oh boy, another day of not happening, and good that it is. Chokin 666, hello, says les bon temps roulette. Hello to Brandy Washington. William Hicks says, tear down and destroy, but pretend it's the opposite. Neil Terry, how to identify a truly useless person? They're called things like young global leaders. Take out a mortgage to pay your rent, says Chokokin 666. This is not on my schedule for today, but it's now being suggested that the California government is going to take a 45% interest in private residences. Oh, and apparently this is going to lead to lower house prices. The people who come up with these ideas before, they formulate them, type them out or whatever, do they spend 10 minutes smashing their head against the wall? Because that's the conclusion that I've come to. How could the government injecting billions upon billions of dollars in the housing market in a state lead to lower house prices? And of course, the government, with a 45% interest in your private residence, would have no inclination to take further control of your life, would it? Hello to Red Sulfur. Emmett Kelly's said, I'm guessing the inner party will exempt themselves from all these new rules and regulations. Well, we know with Leo DiCaprio and all these famous people. Megan Mertz, they fly private jets all over the place. Would it kill them to fly commercial? I mean, even first class, I've only been in first class once, but golly, it sure was better than coach. A lot better. It was like that Seinfeld episode. More smoked salmon, more everything. Hello to Dr. Deadname and 1467 Masterson Wilson. Guess who will own things and have privacy, says Chokokin 666. Indeed. Neil Terry says, of course, if you misbehave, you get no access to the communal goods. Of course, misbehave means criticizing the powers that be. Hello to Sam B. Yo Mama says the fourth. I thought we were still in the third. Something Gamiston says, what would a so-called World Economic Forum be established for, if not the world economy? Red Sulfur says, having chicken tikka curry with basmati rice. Chicken tikka masala, which I am told is a completely made-up inorganic dish, was anointed by a Labour cabinet minister in Britain back in the 90s as the national dish of Britain. He adds topped with spicy pepperoni and a dash of olive oil. Dr. Dead Name says the conspiracy theory to accepted fact pipeline. Red Sulfur says Greek yogurt for dessert, followed by hot chocolate, oat milk, or chamomile tea. Neil Terry says obesity is deadlier than smoking, AIDS, and COVID combined everywhere, yet no big campaign. If anything, the entire system pushes obesity-causing diets while pretending meat is unhealthy. Red Sulfur says, agree, obesity from lockdowns has killed more people than COVID ever could. Red Sulfur says, avoid canola oil. William Hicks says, Kevin, with odds like that, doesn't it make perfect sense to get that experimental mRNA shot, whereby the pharmaceutical companies face no liability for serious side effects? Indeed. Just keep jabbing. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, jab. 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, jab. Und so weiter. Dan points out that Kerry Mullis, inventor of the PCR test, loathed Fauci. And we have a Russian name, which I'm not sure that I can pronounce. Hello to Oscar Toe. And hello to Professor Paul. And let's have yes, and there could be an even bigger problem with this backlash that's going on. I wonder if you could guess what it is. And this is, another example of it's definitely not happening, but it's good that it is. This is from a site I was unfamiliar with until, yesterday. And it's called fairobserver.com. And it's a piece by John Pfeffer. And hang on a minute. Who is he when he is at home? Is he identified here? Come on. Okay. Apparently not. But it is called The Vaccine Pushback is Bad, but Wait for the Climate One. At some point, governments will start using more sticks than carrots to break our deadly dependence on fossil fuels. How will humanity respond? They haven't come up with any alternative for our so-called deadly dependence on fossil fuels. And as I never tire of pointing out, assuming that this green energy boondoggle is even scalable for some period of time, a rather considerable period of time, there would have to be dual systems operating, because you cannot shut off fossil fuels without billions of people dying. I've only had to show my vaccination card a couple of times to eat in a restaurant in New York City, to see a play in Washington, D.C. I was happy to do so. Once inside, I was relieved to be among the vaccinated. Most Americans have gotten vaccinated because they simply want protection for COVID-19. A small number of citizens have gotten jabbed in order to go to restaurants, attend sporting events, or qualify for lottery prizes. More on that later. You think that would be enough? An effective vaccine against a life-threatening disease, an opportunity to regain some semblance of normalcy, a coupon for 10% off your next purchase at the store where you got your shot. Urge to kill rising. Truly a no-brainer, and yet there has been resistance. Imagine an alternative ending to the film I Am Legend, in which the two immune humans transport the anti-zombie vaccine to a compound of survivors, only to be met with questions like, how long did it take to develop this vaccine? Does it contain a microchip? Are you a shill for big pharma? You may have read that in Sweden, people, thousands of them apparently, are willingly injecting themselves with microchips to keep track of their vaccination status. How long did it take to develop this vaccine? Oh, that is not an interesting or important question at all. I mean, less than a year? Okay. How about less than what are we talking about? 3 months now? A month for future vaccines? Yes. Since carrots have only gone so far in breaking down the resistance of the hesitant, governments are now deploying sticks. In one country after another, state is using various forms of economic coercion to break down resistance. These mandates, which are put in scare quotes, require workers by sector, or in some cases all sectors, to comply or risk losing their jobs. As a result, all that anti-lockdown and anti-masking fervor is now getting funneled into opposing these government efforts to boost vaccination rates and prevent the next wave of infection for overwhelming hospitals and funeral homes. Doesn't seem to be working anymore, does it? Does it? Oh, and they're really funeral homes. Does he mean nursing homes? Yeah. But the really scary part is what comes next. I'm not talking about the upcoming epsilon or whatever wave of COVID-19, which is enough to give anyone pause. I'm worried about how the world will react to the inevitable green mandates that governments will impose in the near future. Inevitable green mandates. Here it is from the source. After all, voluntary commitments to cut carbon emissions are just not doing the trick. Oh, but the number of carbon emissions it's determined has fallen in the last decade with little to no human effort, which threatens the very basis of man-made global warming. Call me a pessimist, but I'm not expecting a warm and fuzzy embrace of future climate mandates. The question here is not just the dubious state of humanity's collective intelligence, it's how we conceive of community government and our mutual obligations. Yeah. Anyway, you can, as I say, you can find this at fairobserver.com, and this is telling you where we're going here. No one has been forced to go vegan, trade in their gas guzzler for an electric car. And where do clowns like Pfeffer think that electricity comes from? Lightning? Or take a solar-powered yacht across the Atlantic instead of flying out of Dulles? And where do these solar panels come from? China. And what are they made out of? Coal. And here we go. Here we go. You will own nothing and you will love it. Perhaps governments will continue to use markets to constrain individual choices. Everyone will have to buy electric cars because the old-fashioned combustion kind simply won't be available. Air travel will become prohibitively expensive, except for the elite. Locally grown tomatoes will crowd out ones shipped in from other parts of the world. But free markets, and that's also put in scare quotes, and both corporate actors and individual consumers are slow to respond to existential crises, are resistant to government interventions, and prioritize prices above all else. Really now. So let's imagine a future government mandate that all businesses with more than 100 employees have 1 year to become carbon neutral, or that all citizens are capped at a certain number of kilowatt hours per month in their household, or everyone has a certain travel allowance measured in carbon emissions that covers their commute, their work trips, and their vacations. Oh, and look, there's a picture here of a smiling Joe Biden in between Boris Johnson and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Yeah, in no way could this be considered a conspiracy. No, only evil people. Only evil people could think that. And again, I'm trying to find out information about this John Pfeffer fellow. Perhaps he's identified here. He is the director of foreign policy in Focus. His latest book is Right Across the World, the global networking of the far right and the left response. So if you don't want a globalist dictatorship, that makes you far right. It's coming. Obviously, it's coming. And what we're being told is resistance is futile. Yeah, this is pretty funny. A forecast of 3 billion new, mostly mild infections by March draws skepticism. Again, this is from the New York Times. The new forecast by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington, and we know who these people are, predicts there will be about 3 billion new coronavirus infections in the next 2 months, but as many as there have been in the last 2 years. The IHME COVID models have a spotty track record, to put it mildly, and its methods have been routinely criticized by outside experts. Well, yeah. As William Briggs has pointed out repeatedly, and he's not the only one, models tell you exactly what you tell them to say. Someone who's being mildly inconvenienced by the terror which has overtaken the Western world is Bill Gates, who in bad old days, apparently he just wanted to dominate, rule the software market, but now he wants to dominate, rule the world. Bill Gates predicts the worst part of the pandemic is coming. Gates says he's canceling his holiday plans as Omicron cases surge. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. He also predicted, however, that the current surge in COVID-19 cases could be over within months and the pandemic itself may end next year if we take the right steps. Just when it seemed like life would return to normal, we would be entering the worst part of the pandemic, he tweeted Tuesday. Omicron will hit home for all of us. Close friends of mine now have, and I've canceled most of my holiday plans. He urged people to wear masks, avoid large indoor crowds, and get the COVID-19 booster shot. And Bill Gates in no way benefits from the proliferation of vaccinations, and it would just be outrageous even to entertain that suggestion. Alex Berenson at his Substack 4 hours ago, yet again, Team Apocalypse is wrong. Omicron has already peaked in South Africa. And he gives us a bunch of charts. Again, this has nothing to do with vaccines. Almost 3 out of 4 South Africans is not vaccinated. The early variants of SARS-CoV-2 were cold for younger people in decent shape. Omicron is a cold, period. I said it 2 weeks ago, and I said it last week, and I'll say it again. It is over, barring a new strain. And if you get yourself or your kids vaccinated at this point with a vaccine that doesn't even work against Omicron, you are worse than a fool. And again, up until 2 weeks ago, we were told vis-a-vis vaccine efficacy, never mind the results from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, and Israel for that matter, because the physiology of these people is obviously so different from us in North America. You can just ignore that. Now we're being told, no, the physiology of people in South Africa is so very different from the rest of us that the numbers coming from the place where the virus originated, irrelevant, completely irrelevant. And yes, from conspiracy theory to fact in record time, as someone said on Twitter. This is from NBC News. Dara Gregorian. Governor Gavin Newsom said Tuesday that California will require healthcare workers to get COVID vaccination booster shots, part of a broader plan to combat the recent surge in coronavirus cases. With Omicron on the rise, and the efficacy of the booster shot against Omicron, not great. And I'll have some specific numbers on that shortly. Oh, here's one. This is from dailyskeptic.org, formerly Lockdown Skeptics. Triple vaccinated more than 4 times as likely to test positive for Omicron than unvaccinated, data shows. According to early data published on Tuesday by the ONS, the triple vaccinated are 4.5 times as likely to test positive for a probable Omicron infection than the unvaccinated. The double vaccinated, meanwhile, are 2.3 times as likely to have a probable Omicron infection. What this tells us is that the virus is particularly the Omicron variant is particularly partial to double and triple vaccinated people. In fact, it is selecting for them. Yeah, how about that? But make sure you get your booster shot. And why don't you start waiting in line at 6 o'clock in the morning in the wind and the snow? Because, I don't know, people have lost their minds and our leaders have failed us. Joe Biden is very, very upset. This is from Charlie Spearing at Breitbart. President Biden blamed alternative media sources. Boo! on Tuesday for convincing Americans to refuse the coronavirus vaccine. He criticized media figures and influencers for peddling lies. It's wrong. It's immoral. I call on the purveyors of these lies and misinformation to stop it. Stop it now. And who are these purveyors of misinformation? Let's find. Well, I'll come up with a good one here. Oh, by the way, before we get to that, you remember a few days ago, last week, Jim Cramer, the stock pimp on CNBC, was calling for mandatory vaccination. Guess who's been jabbed 3 times, and guess who got Omicron? That would be Jim Cramer. Now he is raving that Dr. Fauci, knows nothing. Those are the words that he used. Knows nothing. Golly, that's quite a turnaround. Cramer is also not too keen on these rapid tests because they seem to have failed him. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced Tuesday that he is offering New Yorkers $100 per family member if people allow a vaccination team to enter their homes and jab everyone inside. A vaccination team comes to you. They can provide vaccination for the whole family, de Blasio announced. He further declared that the teams that come to your home have the ability to provide whatever help you need. And the $100 incentive is available for every family member. Now, of course, this would not be any kind of special incentive to poor people, would it? Watson comments, de Blasio sounds like a game show host offering cash prizes in exchange for submission to government officials being led into homes and jabbing children. Rest assured that if this doesn't work, de Blasio has made it clear what will be done to force people to take the shots. In an appearance on CNN last week, he noted, human beings are pretty predictable. If you say your paycheck depends on it, on your ability to enjoy life and go do the things you want to do, people will make the practical decision, but we're not pushing hard enough. In the same way that if you order someone to do something and he says no, and then you pull out a loaded pistol and hold it to his head, he's likely to make the practical decision, isn't he? And let's have a little historical perspective on this, okay? Let's go back to India in the days of Indira and Sanjay Gandhi, 2 horrible people. This is from Terence McCoy in the Washington Post, November 15th, 2014. In 1951, a prominent urbane demographer named R.A. Gopalaswamy set out across rural India on an expedition that he hoped would change a country described by the New York Times as a pitiful giant. He was attempting India's first post-independence census. The numbers he produced were staggering. India had 356 million souls, 1/7 of the world's population. India has, 3 times as many people as that now, or more? It has not led to a disaster. Gopaswamy's report produced a policy shift that brought tragedy, the deaths of 13 young women in a free mass sterilization camp in the district of Bilaspur. In all, 60 women became sick following the procedure. And so the government of Indira Gandhi, which her son Sanjay was largely in charge of, decided that, they were going to force people to do the practical thing. So they started offering money, $23 to women in India if they opted for sterilization. And they offered men transistor radios. And when that didn't work, they simply hauled them out of their villages, with the result that in 1 year, 6 million Indian men were forcibly sterilized. But you can't speak of, human rights at a time of, crisis. You can't. Yeah, there's a story from melmagazine.com. In 1976, more than 6 million men in India were coerced into sterilization. The loudspeakers began blaring at 3 a.m. on November 24th, 1976, in the rural village of Attawar, 50 miles south of New Delhi. When 34-year-old Muhammad Yaqub heard hooves approaching, he huddled with 8 villagers in their compounds. It was the Goda police, policemen on horses, warning them of the consequences of non-compliance. Now, where have we heard that word lately? Sterilization was no longer a choice, it was a mandate. Now, where have we heard that word lately? Every man over the age of 15 was directed to assemble at a high school on the main road. For the past year, senior government administrators and police officers had been attempting to convince male villagers with more than 2 children to get a vasectomy, but in a country where being a man was defined by his virility, sterilization was a tough sell. A year earlier, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had declared a national emergency because of what she termed an internal disturbance. In fact, Gandhi was in danger of losing power, having violated multiple election laws, and the courts were closing in. So let's just grab millions of men and bribe them. You know, a lot of these men were what you might call simple. Ooh, free transistor radio. Oh, and we're just going to do something here to you, which is quick, and it's just going to make you healthier. Okay? That's the way they put it. And when word got around that, what it was they were actually doing, then they just started to drag people, from their villages because, it was in the interest of public health. And no one can criticize public health. This is from Steve Wasson at Summit News. Joe Biden appeared in a car crash of a press conference Tuesday, telling Americans that they are free to celebrate Christmas with their families so long as they have done their patriotic duty and taken COVID vaccines. Biden coughed throughout the performance, prompting yet one more suggestions that he has contracted COVID. John Miller at Millerstream tweeted, "Try telling everyone else how unhealthy they are without coughing up a lung next time." I, honest to God, believe it's your patriotic duty, Biden said. I know some Americans are wondering if you can safely celebrate the holidays. No, he doesn't say Christmas, but the holidays with your family and friends. The answer is yes, you can, if you and those you celebrate with are vaccinated, particularly if you've got your booster shot. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to talk, as I've mentioned previously, I live in British Columbia, but I live on an island called Vancouver Island, where the provincial capital, Victoria, is located. That's the city where I live. Vancouver Island has a population of approximately 800,000 people. Now, people who live on islands, as we've seen, Newfoundland and New Zealand and other places, have gotten off pretty easy, because they live on islands. But so how devastated has Vancouver Island been, such that the civil rights of everyone living on it have been abrogated to an extreme degree, even those who are double vaccinated? Total COVID-19 cases, 15,144. Active cases, 1,145. Currently admitted to ICU, 15. Currently hospitalized, 38. Deaths, 138. That's 138 deaths in almost 24 months. So you can do the math there. Was it about 5.5 a month? Yes, you can see what a health catastrophe this is, which justifies any abrogation of human rights. And it certainly justifies the destruction of society and the rape of our economies. The latrine wallas have decided this. Oh, okay. Bruce Arthur of the Toronto Star is my gauge for COVID-19 hysteria. A really good thread, and I would add only one thing: the sheer speed of the virus could mean a huge hit for hospitals very quickly, and if it's mild for most, that almost makes it more dangerous for the rest. And we all use the same hospitals. Oh my God. Oh my God. Interesting thread about the UK Imperial study. Oh, Imperial College. Oh, yeah, they're so very reliable. Professor Neil Pansdown. Imperial study on Omicron. Again, most cases can be mild, but the thing to watch for in terms of hospitals is how it affects everyone. Oh, and he takes a bash at Jason Kenney because Kenney is not sufficiently hysterical. Watch for this and more. Vaccine status: vaccination seems to be holding firm against severe illness, but what Omicron does to more vulnerable populations, especially the unvaccinated and non-immune, is the big worry. And U.S. as Canadian leaders urge prudence and caution during holidays, vaccinated Americans told they can safely celebrate. This is from Christopher Nardi at the National Post. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, telling Canadians to hunker down. But here is the best bit. Chrystia Freeland, who is probably going to be Canada's next Prime Minister, she said she strongly pushed back against the suggestion her government's current COVID-19 messaging sounded worried, if not panicked. That is totally not the case, because she's an uptalker. This is a woman in her 50s, formerly foreign minister, now finance minister, who is an uptalker. Quite the contrary. I think Canadians should be reassured by the fact that we are ready for this as a country. Canada is not the United States. And I think all of us know that very profoundly. Freeland said, yes, United States. Boo! You see, oh, well, I'm just going to tell Canadians that they're not like Americans. And, well, yeah, thank God we're not like them. They haven't destroyed their, economy and their society as stiffly as we have. So that makes them terrible people. Someone called Dana, not Skelly, on Twitter, using data to track equity on TV. Her banner on Twitter, it says resist. And it's all pictures of Princess Leia from Star Wars. That's how serious she is. And she tweeted out, I'm flying today, but I'm not effing around with Omicron, Pfizer ×3 negative rapid test, natural immunity, N95 sealed to my face with surgical tape, secondary mask for displaying opinions, face shield, vinyl gloves, touchscreen gloves, a shit ton of Xanax. And there's a picture of her where this demonstrates that she's not exaggerating. She was very upset that people seem to think that she was hysterical. Very upset indeed. I just want to save lives, particularly like 2-year-old lives. And if you people, think that's funny, well, I guess I'll just have to get off Twitter and leave you to it. And, oh, yeah, okay. Shifting the goalposts. Fauci and the World Health Organization said last year masks are it's just a gesture, just a cosmetic gesture. It's not doing any good. Then they said, no, it is vitally important and you must wear them. What kind of mask? Well, any kind of mask. And now, in December 2021, we get this, as reported by Pam Key at Breitbart. CNN medical analyst Leanna Wen said Monday that cloth masks are, quote, little more than facial decorations, unquote, in preventing the spread of the Omicron variant of coronavirus. They're telling us this now. Oh, well, you see, the reason, it's not the vaccines. It's because you were all wearing, or most of you were wearing the wrong kind of mask. Tasha Caredon at the National Post, one of Canada's leading conservatives, writes, Omicron brings an avalanche of awful, but don't despair yet. Well, there's plenty of time to despair, I suppose. Even if you feel like getting COVID-19 is inevitable, ending up in the hospital is not, particularly since it's not putting people in the hospital. And so what is she worried about? Don't give in to the voices who tut-tut that hardly anyone dies of this. It's overblown. Personally, it's not death I fear. I don't believe you. It's long COVID. I know someone who has this now, and it is horrible. A racing heartbeat for no reason, brain fog so severe you can't read a sentence, exhaustion and breathlessness that make it impossible to climb a flight of stairs. In other words, it's the new chronic fatigue syndrome, which is not a disease. It's a made-up disease that hysterical women claim to suffer from. And I guess we're going to get a lot of that. From the Globe and Mail, Ian Bailey and Marika Walsh, Tory MP touts false information about COVID-19 vaccines as she casts herself as an advocate for the unvaccinated. Well, she actually is an advocate for the unvaccinated. Rachel Thomas claimed that the unvaccinated were being demonized. Where's the lie? Member of Parliament for Lethbridge made the comments in a video posted to Facebook December 16th, which is still online. In the post, she makes claims that are not backed by readily available information from public health agencies. You mean like telling us that there's no point in wearing a mask and telling us we had to wear a mask and that cloth masks are perfectly acceptable, and then telling us nearly 2 years into this pandemic, you should just throw away your cloth masks. Timothy Caulfield, who, by the way, if you believe that physiognomy is real, and you should, because it is, Timothy Caulfield is, I could describe him as Canada's best known Bryan Singer lookalikes. The resemblance is uncanny. He said that the comments of this MP caused great harm and use misinformation to try to normalize or justify not getting vaccinated against COVID-19. Seriously, check out this guy's picture. Oh, yes. Let's hear from a leading public health expert, a reliable, trustworthy source. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The left-wing mayor of Hamburg was caught lying to justify discrimination against the unjabbed. He claimed the unvaccinated represented 95% of COVID cases. After a Senate investigation, the actual figure was revealed to be 14.3%. I guess that's what they call a noble lie. Isn't that what it's called? And I already talked about Eugippius at his Substack and his thoughts about Omicron and strangeness about this. And okay, we've already talked about Alex Berenson. Let's talk about the Archbishop of Canterbury. Jesus wants you to take the vaccine. Yeah, he actually said that. He actually said that. Get vaccinated, get boosted amid Omicron surge. Here's another person who's not been keeping up with the data. This is by Jack Newman and Jack Wright at the Daily Mail. It's not about me and my rights to choose. It's about how I love my neighbor. Yeah, okay. Well, what we're learning about COVID-19 is that Omicron seems to love the vax. Seems to love it. What are the numbers from Ontario? And I'm going to keep repeating this every single day. This is from Cody Wilson at CP24. Ontario provincial health officials logged 4,383 new infections today, up from 3,453 a Tuesday and 1,808 1 week ago. Today's total is the highest daily case count reported since April 23rd. Of the new cases confirmed today, let's see, 222 involve people with an unknown vaccination status. 176 involve those who are partially vaccinated. 746 involve those who are unvaccinated, and 3,243 involve people who are considered fully vaccinated. Yeah, I don't want to hear about this mRNA treatment and the word efficacy again. But I'm going to be hearing it. No question about that. And we're almost done with this lamentable topic. But since it has become the biggest story in the world and has subsumed all other subjects, including sports, the Olympics, politics, I don't know what, sexuality, just everything. Chicago Mayor Beetlejuice says, to put it simply, if you have been living vaccine-free, your time is up. December 22nd, 2021, from the Oregon Health Authority, 622 fully vaccinated residents died of COVID. But that can't be happening. That literally can't be happening. As someone said about Mayor Beetlejuice on Twitter, this means war. And, with the suggestion from Joe Biden, a few days ago, that you're all going to die? And it sounded like, a promise, not just a threat. Extraordinary thing for a politician to say. But of course, Mayor Beetlejuice, or Lori Lightfoot, as she is otherwise known, she radiates malevolence such as I have never seen in a politician. Well, certainly not a politician in this continent. No, not a bit of it. William Briggs, statistician to the Star, previously mentioned, has on his website today, has another excerpt from his new book, Everything You Believe is Wrong. It's about the wisdom of crowds. And Briggs suggests there is no wisdom in crowds. On March the 7th, 1907, Francis Galton wrote a brief but interesting article for Nature magazine entitled Vox Populi, which opened, in these democratic days, any investigation into the trustworthiness and peculiarities of popular judgments is of interest. That was true then, and it is true now, Briggs comments, and only it is more important these days. Some clue is not a clue, Briggs states. If you ask a man who hasn't a clue about the value of something, his guess is useless. This follows from the no clue premise. Having some clue is not the same as having no clue. A group of clueless is just as ignorant as one clueless man. Forming the mean or median or any other measure from a collection of baseless guesses is no better than using the guess from any one man. Galton, a good eugenicist that he was, would agree that this also has deep implications for democracy, but he never imagined to draw that lesson. And I am not inclined to take seriously the opinions of people, whether they are so-called ordinary people or whether they are so-called experts, who apparently have no idea how many people live in a particular Canadian province, or how many people live in the United States, or how many people typically die every year in a typical Canadian province or in the United States of America. I'm simply not interested in what they have to say. And if you've been on social media in the last few days, you have all these people wailing about Omicron. Oh my God, the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. Ontario, how many people currently in ICU due to Omicron? 0. How many people in the United States? How many confirmed deaths from Omicron in the United States? Last time I checked, 0. Let's talk about James Franco, Renaissance man. described as actor, filmmaker, and writer by Wikipedia. And he's been rather under a cloud for several years, but he has an explanation. This is a story by Abby White in The Hollywood Reporter. James Franco admits to sleeping with students while addressing sexual harassment lawsuit allegations. In a Yetter interview for Sirius XM's The Jess Cagle Show, the actor addresses his public silence following a 2019 class action lawsuit brought by former students of his Studio 4 school while denying allegations about what occurred in a course titled Sex Scenes. Yeah, okay. He admits that the choice of this title, Sex Scenes, was not the best. The allegations that he was creating a pipeline where women would be subjected to his personal and professional sexual exploitation in the name of education. Did not seem like the right time to say anything, he said about the accusations. There were people that were upset with me, and I needed to listen. Well, either you did what you're accused of or you didn't. And most people, if they were accused of things that they didn't do, particularly the kind of things that typically wreck a career these days, would be upfront and loud. It's a natural human instinct that when people are accused of bad things and they don't defend themselves, people believe that they are guilty. I mean, everyone understands that, right? Increasingly explicit sex scenes on camera in an orgy-type setting. Yeah, again, it was just not the right title to choose. It was not about sex scenes, he says. I was not teaching people how to do sex scenes or intimate scenes or anything of that nature. Okay. All right. But this is the thing that struck out, or that stood out for me, which is that, you see, one could say that James Franco is a bad person, an immoral person, a person of immoderate appetites. But no, 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 no. James Franco has a disease, and one cannot criticize people with diseases. I believe it's against the law in the United States and the Americans with Disability Act. At another point in the interview, Franco addresses his history of drug abuse and sex addiction, as well as how his relationship to fame exacerbated his addiction-related behaviors. Once I stopped using alcohol to sort of fill that hole, it was like, oh, success, attention, this is great. And so in a weird way, I got addicted to validation. Having it off with as many young women as you can. Oh, that's validation, particularly when you're in a position of authority over them and you're a powerful person in the entertainment world. It's such a powerful drug, Franco said of sex addiction. No, it is not a drug. It is not close to being a drug. I got hooked on it for 20 more years, and the insidious part of it was that I stayed sober from alcohol all that time. This is not, you shouldn't have said that, okay? There was a possible excuse there, but now you're saying that you were sober. I went to meetings all that time. Well, isn't that nice? I even tried to sponsor other people. And so in my head, it was like, oh, I'm sober. I'm living a spiritual life. Is that really what you were telling yourself, Jimbo? Where on the side, I'm acting out now in all these other ways, and I couldn't see it. Yes, it's just so bizarre that a man approximately 40 years old would want to have sex with a lot of attractive women half his age. So very perverse. I know this term addiction is of no efficacy. It has no efficacy. It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't help us understand the world or people's behavior therein any better. As Thomas Zaz said regarding drugs, and how it is that drugs, which the FDA and the drug company said were not addictive, turned out to be addictive. Any drug that people like to take because it makes them feel better will be judged as addictive. And one can go broader with this. Any substance, any activity that people like to do because it makes them feel better will be judged to be addictive, which again has no efficacy whatsoever. Perhaps if James Franco didn't have this pipeline for pliant young women, he would have had sex with far fewer of them. In more culture news, according to Amanda Harding at the Daily Wire, critics slam Matrix Resurrections as laughably bad. And I'm looking at Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss and one of the Wachowski things in the middle. Yes, apparently it's a reboot, the purpose of which, like I gather, Spider-Man No Direction Home or whatever it's called, is supposed to remind you of the previous films by let's bring back all the people who played Spider-Man and let's have all the villains from all the other Spider-Man movies, and because we can't do anything original anymore. But yes, this new Matrix film, it does serve a political purpose, though. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Woke Matrix scriptwriters complain about the phrase red-pilled being kidnapped by right-wingers. Yeah, that's the funny thing about memes. They sometimes get away from you. One of the scriptwriters said things like the red pill, blue pill trope or meme on how it was kidnapped by the right wing, the verb to red pill, and so on. So one thing we were mindful of is how to reclaim that trope too late, to renew the meaning of red pill, blue pill. Do you know what it's actually about, though? It's about being trans. That's what one of the Wachowskis has said. It's really all about being trans. We didn't know it at the time because we weren't trans. And no, wait a minute, we were always trans. It gets kind of tricky, doesn't it? Oh, and here's some good news. Some of us have been waiting for this for quite a long time. This is from justthenews.com. And John Solomon. Hillary Clinton's team long fought to keep its ties to Christopher Steele's dossier from public view, but special counsel John Durham is now making clear he has a strong interest in her campaign's behavior during the Russia collusion probe. He is even suggesting some of her aides could be summoned as trial witnesses. Durham's earth-shaking revelation came inside a routine court filing this month in the case of Igor Y. Danchenko, a Russian analyst who was a primary source in 2016 for Steele's now infamous dossier. Danchenko has been charged with repeatedly lying to the FBI during the Russia collusion probe and has pleaded innocent. And I said, yes, really, on Twitter. And here we go. I got to get back on the tainter horse here. I'll keep it relatively brief. So Tainter, in his monograph, The Collapse of Complex Societies, is discussing various hypotheses for civilizational collapse. And he discussed the dinosaur model, the runaway train model, and the house of cards model. And we left it off with the dinosaur model. So moving on. The runaway train model may be a variant of the dinosaur model, but it has its own distinct characteristics. A complex society is seen as impelled along a path of increasing complexity, unable to switch directions, regress, or remain static. When obstacles impinge, it can continue in only the direction it is headed, so that catastrophe ultimately results. The variety of studies that cite positive feedback mechanisms make precisely this assumption about complex societies. Ferrero's arguments about urbanization in the Roman Empire, Scherer's views about social and economic intensification among the Maya, and Conrad and Demaray's account of the Aztecs and the Inca all assume that some factor in these societies make it impossible to deviate from their catastrophic paths. The House of Cards model differs from the previous two. It suggests that complex societies, either as a rule or in certain kinds of environments, are inherently fragile, operating on low margins of reserve so that their collapse is inevitable. Betty Megger's environmental limitation theory and Flannery's and Rappaport's maladaptation arguments fall under this model. There is much to give one pause in these models. Our present knowledge of complex societies does not allow us to either conclude or assume that they are inherently fragile or static or incapable of shifting directions, or that they cannot respond to productivity fluctuations, catastrophes, or other ailments. Indeed, it is not hard to point to societies that have done some or all of these things, e.g. the Roman resurgence and reorganization following the crises of the 3rd century AD, population movements and societal reorganization at various times in southwestern prehistory, the late classic Mayan Renaissance following the hiatus, and various political cycles in ancient China. In other words, our knowledge of complex societies will not support the assumptions such studies make. Complex societies are not simply intractable fossils. Where they do appear incapable of change, that is a matter to be explained. By itself, it explains nothing. The runaway train model, as formulated in the cases of the Aztecs and the Inca, is belied by available data. In both cases, late rulers apparently perceived that further conquest was unprofitable and took steps to change the political and ideological systems that generated expansion. Conrad and Desmarais interpret Aztec and Inca resistance to these changes as a failure of the attempt, but this cannot be known with confidence. The Spanish conquest prematurely terminated the process of change. The attempted reforms of Montezuma II, Aztec, and Huáscar, Inca, can easily be seen as appropriate first steps to curtail abusive systems. Certainly, Webb's account of the overthrow of the Kapu system in Hawaii by Kamehameha II indicates that ideologies, even entrenched ones, can be changed when necessary. A few additional comments are in order. When Willie argues that the Maya collapsed because they did not proceed far enough on the ceremonial center to true city continuum, some confusion results. Other scholars have seemed to argue that the Maya may have been too far along this continuum, or at least too far for their environmental setting, e.g. Meggers, Sabloff, Scherer. Mayanists cannot be expected to be more unified in their views than any other archaeologists, but some clarification of this point would be useful. Were the Maya too complex or not complex enough? And how can collapse result from both? Phillips' use of the term efficiency carries a whole series of ambiguities. He argues that societies using resources efficiently, i.e. fully, experience inflexibility in resource allocation, since with more benefits, a particular activity becomes harder to abandon. Here he assumes that activities performed efficiently by a complex society are necessarily beneficial. Conflict theorists will disagree, and we might all wonder. Indeed, the very notion that complexity is required to use resources efficiently is debatable. David Stewart argues the opposite, that complex societies use resources inefficiently, and that this is one of their weaknesses. See Stewart and Gautier. Finally, Phillips' assumption that allocatable resources decrease with increasing complexity denies to complex societies any flexibility and to their leaders any capacity for rational action. Phillips assumes that the levying of resources by a state, A, remains at a constant level, and B, is not geared to needs. The possibility of increasing resource flow by increasing taxes and or by intensification is ignored. And I'll have more from Tainter tomorrow. Let's go back to the chat. I'm going to be talking, we're going to be moving to a very late Music Monday in a few minutes. And in the chat, who do we have? Red Sulphur is heading off to what is no doubt a delightful dinner. The first Matrix film was cool, William Hicks says, and then yikes. I must confess that I fell asleep during the first Matrix film. There's very few films that I've actually fallen asleep in. One of them was Born Free. That was a long time ago. One of them was the Mulan, that Disney Chinese film. Okay. Neil Patrick Doogie is also in the new Matrix movie. Carrie Ann Moss looks ancient, says Palcasso 88. Well, the first Matrix movie was made a long time ago, and she was hardly in the beginning of her career. She's still a fine-looking woman. William Hicks says addiction means he just can't help himself. Well, he helps himself. It's only a crime if you don't film it, says Brandon Smith. Neil Terry says rubbing raw garlic on a bee sting kills the irritation immediately. Okay. Dan says Franco is good friends with that witch, Marina Abramovich, who is an actual witch, spirit cooking. Neil Terry says many of the intelligent people I know are still quite weak, extremely susceptible to social pressure. A failure of character is just as bad as a failure of intelligence at times like these. Yes. Well, there's the the mimetic theory. what was his name? Rene Girard, which I think explains a lot. That, everyone else was doing it. Yeah, Rene Girard. Everyone else was doing it. Okay, so I want to do it too. He saw human desire as not individual but collective or social. Ultimately, of course, human desire is individual, but I think to a very large extent, it is a collectivity. I mean, how many people were changing their sexes as recently as 10 years ago? And then suddenly, I won't say that everyone is doing it, thank God, but it has become almost routine. Oh, yes. Bainbridge Island is near Seattle in Washington State. It is one of the most beautiful places on earth. I'm looking at pictures here of the mountains, the ferry and the sound, and the mountains in the background. It is also a wealthy place. According to a 2007 estimate, this is from Wikipedia, the median income for a household was $88,243, and the median income from a family was $108,605. People are well off in Bainbridge Island, but one would not get that impression reading an extraordinary essay in the New York Times by someone with the improbable name of John Muallim. And I have long had a prejudice against people called John, that there's only one J in their name. Yes, he's a contributor to American Public Radio series This American Life, because of course he is. And he's been contributing to the New York Times since 2006. So he has a piece in the New York Times today, which is essentially an apologia for atomization, social atomization. Is life better when we're together? Yeah, for the most part, yes, because man is a social animal, as is well known. It begins talking about a Serbian hermit named Panta Petrovic. Okay, he just didn't want to he lives in a cave, and eliminates his waste in a bathtub for some strange reason. His closest companion is a pig. Then he got vaccinated, and people who had thought that there was something admirable about his hermetic life turned on him. But let's go here. Impossible not to concentrate on how maddening and horrible connectedness to other human beings can be. Yes, mean people suck. Ooh, edgy take there, John. Sometimes it was hard just to stop focusing on the simple reality other human beings can kill you. I don't think much of that goes on in Bainbridge Island. And often it seemed that they can kill you without much compunction or consequence. They can kill you? Well, how? Are you going to go, you run down the list of ways to murder people? Well, no, the most important one apparently is they can kill you by refusing to pull their mask over their nostrils, by bureaucratically denying you adequate health care, by allowing you to live on the street, by keeping you at work when a tornado closes in, by shooting you with their guns just because they felt scared. Oh, is that the reason why most people are shot to death by guns in the United States? Because the killers were scared? Is life better when we're together? It used to be a question that only hermits bothered to ask. Now it's a pressing mainstream concern. Well, no, it is in the pages of the New York Times. Many Americans did bounce through the year ecstatic to be in a community again, but only with certain people who hadn't revealed themselves to be morons, jerkwads, or fascists. I'm not paraphrasing. This is what it actually says. Something about passing through the ordeal of the pandemic seemed to empower people to finally write these other people off. Yeah, as if they needed much of a push. If true cohesion is impossible, it seemed permissible to scale back the project of togetherness by drawing a cozy circle around us and a bright flaming line between us and them, as all people throughout history have always done. But the New York Times doesn't seem to understand this. And he talks about group identities. And yes, humans have an almost unstoppable propensity to clump ourselves together into groups. Golly, I wonder why that could be. How about differences between people? Huh? That would be one reason. And then he talks about what happened on January the 6th, which apparently has something to do with social atomization and why that is a good thing because, mean people suck. Remember? I don't know how an mRNA vaccine works, for example, and though I did sometimes wonder, even worry about their safety, I ultimately just trusted the scientific community that told me to stick one in my arm. Yeah, this is a contributor to the New York Times. This is a radical new technology which had never been used successfully. Moderna's attempts had failed horribly over the years. And oh, by the way, Pfizer decided to terminate their test of their mRNA vaccine by vaccinating the control group. That perhaps should have raised some eyebrows. Huh? I would have thought so. So we have some expert, Dr. Knowles here, Scott Gabriel Knowles. I've never seen such antisocial behavior at scale in my lifetime in the United States. Never seen it raised up to the level of mainstream politics. It's been really startling. On January 6th, he turned on his television and saw an emergent group there too, a community of grossly misinformed, if not willfully misinformed, insurrectionists who, although they had been unmistakably riled up by an authority figure at the rally beforehand, were now storming the Capitol as a self-organizing group of volunteers. I can't deconstruct the psychology of each one of those people, Dr. Knowles explained, but it was clear to him from some of their own statements that many were part of a community that's reacting to something they see as a bigger disaster than COVID, the Black Lives Matter protest. That is, they were responding to a perceived emergency. Something like over 220 cities in America being burned extensively, but that's just a perceived emergency. Huh? Just a perceived emergency from people, who suck, right? Some will be volunteers and some will be vigilantes. Mu'alam concludes, but both may be reacting to a similar feeling of free fall, of tumbling. This doesn't make them morally equivalent. In the end, morality is what keeps them from being equivalent. I know it's important to keep drawing that distinction, to keep calling out. I also know it's not enough. The New York Times seems to have managed to create a new species. I mean, it's humanoid, but it seems to lack all reason, a sense of proportion, and self-control. These are the people who are called on to contribute to the New York Times. I'm going to be talking about Bob Stanley's book, The History of Pop. I just have to open some tabs here. I really like this book a lot. It can be compared, I suppose, to two books which I have read with great pleasure, written by Chris O'Leary, which is a song-by-song examination from the beginning to the end of the songs of David Bowie. And the first one is called Rebel Rebel, and the second is called Ashes to Ashes. They work a little differently than Bob Stanley's book does. because this is a book. There's a lot about America in it, but it is a book about music that was popular in Britain. He does talk again. He does talk about music that's popular in America, but songs that were popular in America that did not become songs in Britain, he's not particularly interested in. America influencing Britain from the 1950s onwards, and then from the 1960s onwards, Britain influencing America. But when I say Britain, I mean England. He makes a point of saying that during the Merseybeat days, a band from Glasgow might as well have been, from the moon. That's how far away it seemed from the music business headquarters in London. Bob Stanley, born in 1964, is a journalist. He started as a journalist. Then he was the co-founder of a band called Saint Etienne, which David Wisdom of the CBC always used to call the perfect pop band. I note that Bob Stanley was born Robert Schuckman. That is to say that he's Jewish, and that might explain his particular affinity for music created out of the Brill Building. But I am not Jewish, and I have a particular affinity for the music out of the Brill Building as well. Saint Etienne is a, how would you say, electro-pop group. And they have been fairly successful in Britain. And I suppose they're one of those bands who they became popular in the 1990s, and then their popularity fell away as they grew older and newer things showed up. But now I suppose they are considered a beloved British institution. And they're lucky in that respect, because this does not seem to have happened, say, to a similar band, the Pet Shop Boys. Their first record, Fox Space Alpha, which has one of my favorite covers, a really, really lovely color of a blonde woman wearing a cap, wearing a sweater and a skirt. And she is in a copse, and she's holding a fox. It says, a sign that says Fox Space Alpha. There's so much in this photograph. There is the beauty, almost the virginal beauty of the model. There is the sylvan landscape. There's this defiance in her holding a sign that says Fox Space Alpha, as if it's a protest sign. Speaking of covers, their 2012 album, Words and Music by Saint Etienne, it really has, to me, it is a breathtaking cover, because it is a map. It is an actual map. And the band got the idea of how about putting song titles, replacing street names with song titles, 312 of them, indicating their influences. And it is actually, it's a delight to look at. But it indicates, the cover indicates, I mean, if you hadn't realized that from listening to the records, of the what you might call Catholic taste in music. And Bob Stanley certainly has a Catholic taste in music, and his knowledge of popular music is, I would have to say, encyclopedic. This is a big book, a big book. And one of the things I noticed from the 624 pages in paperback, it is full of thousands, tens of thousands of facts. Now, I didn't go, he frequently lists the top chart position of songs he finds interesting, both in the United States, if applicable, and in Britain. So I didn't, confirm them, but I know a fair amount about pop music, particularly British pop music. And I noticed only 2 stylisms in the book. I'm sure there are others. But he talks about the leering a wolf, leering cartoon wolf, famous in American animation, which he ascribes to Chuck Jones. That was not Chuck Jones, that was Tex Avery. And he describes Paul Anka as being an American, and Paul Anka is actually a Canadian from Ottawa. Of course, like all such people, he left Canada a long time ago. But us Canadians are very sensitive about that sort of thing. So, what does pop music mean? Well, you could say that Bob Stanley is an inclusivist rather than an exclusivist. He says that that rock music is pop music, and that R&B is pop music, and soul music is pop music, and hip hop is pop music, indie house, etc. Um, that is to say, you could say that pop music is music that is popular. Now, is classical music popular? Well, I suppose it's popular in the sense uh, that Beethoven symphonies have been listened to for hundreds of years, and they are new versions come out on a regular basis. And of course, I could give many such examples. But the point is that classical music, unless it is this so-called crossover music, it does not appear in the charts. When you look at the Billboard Top 100 or the Billboard Top 200, these are the records which have sold the most. They have, Billboard breaks out charts for classical music and for other genres, but pop music. The pop music lists are the records that sell the most. So, by that definition, classical music is not popular music. Uh, I noticed that Bob Stanley, he takes the de rigueur stab against what's called rockism. I guess everyone has to do it, although he's not obnoxious on that score. Now, it's difficult, if not impossible, to write an intelligent or even an intellectual book about pop music without being to some degree rockist. But rockism, which apparently is a grave sin indeed, well, let's go to the Wikipedia entry for that. Rockism, a term used similarly as racism, is a belief that rock music is dependent on values such as authenticity and artfulness, and thus such values elevate the genre over other forms of popular music. So-called rockists may promote the artifices stereotyped in rock music or may regard the genre as the normative state of popular music. Poptimism or popism is the belief that pop music is as worthy of professional critique and interest as rock music. Detractors of poptimism describe it as a counterpart of rockism that unfairly privileges the most famous or best-selling pop, hip hop, and R&B acts. Well, if you're familiar with a Pitchfork magazine, you will see the radical change in its editorial stance. I don't know, when was it? Like 15 years ago? Pitchfork is racist. Well, why is it racist? Oh, I don't know. They're not writing paeans, dozens of paeans, or hundreds a year, or thousands a year for every new hip hopper who comes on the scene. Because, that is the most vital kind of music. It's the music from the streets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Bob Stanley does not really go very far down that rabbit hole, although he does make it clear that the hip hop music of hoes and bitches and blings and Hennessy and all that has very little appeal to him. And I have to say that I agree with him. He's not. He doesn't like Patti Smith, and boy, I'm in agreement with him there. And he thinks that the last Beatles album, which I talked about a couple of weeks ago, the last to be released, Let It Be is naff. I fully agree there. He is not very pleased with what he considers to be the exploitation of political radicalism by the Clash. And I really have to agree there. You know, if any of you have ever seen that movie called Rude Boy, which is kind of semi-documentary about the Clash, and I saw it in the theater, I think the day it came out. And then I saw it a few years later on television, and it seemed to be a completely different movie. I gather there were several different versions. But, you know, it's obvious that Joe Strummer, he given very little thought to politics in his life. You know, he was just on the side of the good guys, of course, right? And, you know, they were good guys for the most part because he was, you know, on that side. He didn't seem to really understand what communism was, to give an example, you know, but people ate it up. They absolutely ate it up. So when does pop music, when does it begin in Britain? Well, Bob Stanley takes as a starting point the charts, the New Musical Express chart in 1952, if I've remembered that correctly. And before then, well, it was sheet music. Sheet music was very, very popular from the 19th century, I guess, until, well, the 1950s. People sound strange, but people, you know, would hear of a song, they'd hear someone perform a song, probably in an amateur setting, and they'd want the music so they could bang it out on the old piano. Stanley mentions this in his book, by the 1950s, that records had become so popular that you could pick up a piano on the street for free, that so many pianos were being disposed of that you couldn't sell them, which is really kind of remarkable, actually. So the idea of, you know, charts, record charts. Now, I have to explain that now the record charts are determined by actual sales. In the United States, for the longest time, they mixed up a radio play in there. And of course, radio play is going to be influenced by the people who determine what records are going to be played on the radio, as opposed to sales, which are far more democratic. I mean, if a record is available in the shops and people buy it, this demonstrates that that is actually popular. You know, the payola scandals of the past demonstrated that the judicious application of money can make records played on the radio. Now, Ralph J. Gleason, who was the co-founding editor of Rolling Stone magazine, always used to say, you can't polish a turd. Well, I think that he's wrong about that, and very wrong indeed. People hear things enough, or they watch it on American Idol or whatever, and yeah, it becomes popular simply out of repetition. Now, this book is going to be particularly interesting to people with a special interest in British popular music from the 1950s. Now, as explained earlier, there is a great deal about American popular music, and Bob Stanley knows an awful lot about R&B music and soul music and its various permutations and jump music and rockabilly and, well, everything. But there is a great deal of attention in this book paid to people. They were Americans, but they proved to be far more popular, at least over the long term, in Britain than in America. Let's see, who do we have here? Gene Vincent is one. Roy Orbison is another. Gene Pitney, the Everly Brothers. I mean, I could give many other examples, but there were certain American pop singers who Britain took to heart Now, of course, one of them would be Elvis Presley, and it's arguable at the time of his death in 1977, he was more popular in Britain than he was in America. Obviously, not in terms of numbers, but Britain has, for the longest time, had a particular kind of Elvis fan, a particular rabid kind of fan. I'll mention this again because it's one of my favorite stories, that Tony Tyler wrote a book. What's it called? I Hate Music or something like this. I Hate Rock and Roll. He had been an associate editor or assistant editor of the New Musical Express for several years in its heyday. And he had quit the NME by the time that Elvis died, but he happened to be visiting the office when it was announced that Elvis had died. And so they was decided that the whole of the issue was going to be devoted to Elvis. And so they had articles on every conceivable different aspect of Elvis, his songs, his career, his legacy, right? And Nick Logan, who was the editor at the time, the most successful editor in the history of the New Musical Express, he'd asked Tony Tyler, we have to come up with a headline for the cover. So what do you think? And Tony Tyler said, how about Elvis says no to Britain? And I laughed so hard, I might have fallen off the chair. I'll have to explain the joke for you. Elvis played almost the entirety of his shows, many thousands of shows he did in his career in the United States of America. He played a handful in Canada, including one at Empire Stadium in Vancouver. Now, there was a reason for this, because Colonel Parker, his manager, did not want to leave North America. Now, I'll explain that until fairly recently, passing back and forth between Canada and the United States was routine. It isn't anymore, but it used to be. And so Colonel Parker did not want to leave North America. He didn't want to leave the United States. Why not? Because his name wasn't Colonel Parker. He was a Dutchman, a Dutch con man who was an illegal immigrant to the United States. And he feared that if he ever left the United States, he would not be allowed back in. Well, there's a great deal about Elvis Presley in Bob Stanley's book. And he talks about the revolutionary effect that Elvis had. And I'm sorry, I apologize. I can't remember the name of the book, another history of pop music. I think it was by a Chicago rock critic. I don't think it was Greg Kot, but he was talking about Hound Dog and the effect that this song had on audiences, the shocking effect that it had on audiences. And it made me think, because Stanley is really good on these sort of binary divisions or historical divisions in popular music, that something comes along. And so, well, that stuff that we were all listening to until 6 months ago, that's old fashioned. And I don't want to listen to that anymore. Of course, you've got the reactionaries, like the reactionaries who shook their fist at the Beatles, say. And you see a great depiction of that in Robert Zemeckis' and Bob Gale's first film, I Want to Hold Your Hand, which I cannot recognize. I cannot say enough good things about. So to me, Hound Dog, that was cornball stuff. And then I thought about it again. And the author talked about, the machine gun snare drum and just the primitive howl, of Elvis Presley. And I thought, I understand it now. I understand how shocked and appalled people were by that song. And so much more about Elvis. He wore eyeliner on stage, the way he wore his hair, the way he dressed, Elvis the pelvis, all that sort of thing. Yes, it was genuinely shocking. I mean, Frank Sinatra, who is covered a great deal in this book, certainly thought it was shocking. He was disgusted by it. But you see, Frank Sinatra had begun as a teen idol, just like Elvis Presley. And there was a famous riot regarding a Frank Sinatra concert. And the Bobby Soxers were the names of Sinatra's fans, young women who dressed in a certain way, and they behaved appallingly during his concerts. And there was a kind of, a folk scare there. Oh my God, civilization is coming to an end. But Frank Sinatra matured. In fact, he left Columbia Records because of a man called Mitch Miller, who was once one of the most popular men in America. And Mitch Miller was the head of artists and repertoire at Columbia, and he made Frank Sinatra bark on a song, had him recording novelty songs, and Frank said, "I've had enough of this." Eventually, he went to Capitol Records, where he made the records that we all know and love, or at least some of us know and love. They were really kind of Liederzyklus, as the Germans say, song cycles, that Frank Sinatra was consciously making art at Capitol Records. So when Elvis Presley comes along, who was artless, he was appalled. But we see this in popular music again and again and again. That Bob Stanley talks about how Mersey Beat, the English invasion, was regressive, and if you look at it from an intellectual point of view, this is absolutely true. Absolutely true. You look at the sophistication of the songs being churned out at the Brill Building. The Beatles with their yeah, 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 and their three chords and such like, the primitiveness. Yes, it was a regression in that sense. I want to talk about the Brill Building, because so many great songs came out of it. And I'm going to read a selection from this book. Songwriters. Okay, we'll talk about Don Kirshner. Now, if you've ever read anything about the Monkees or seen documentaries, Don Kirshner, who later had his own show, Rock Concert, in the 70s, he was the villain because he wouldn't let the Monkees be authentic and play on their own records. Well, that's not who Don Kirshner was, and that's not why he was hired. Don Kirshner, his Alden Publishing Company, and his Dimension record label were at the heart of this boom. Kirshner's nickname was the man with the golden ears. He used a team of 24 songwriters, which included Carole King, Barry Mann, and Neil Sedaka, and none of whom were over 25, working in a warren of cubicles fitted with nothing more than a desk and a piano in a nondescript building at 1650 Broadway in New York City. They redefined modern pop by taking rock and roll uptown. They added a Latin-influenced percussion and string arrangements and created little symphonies for the kids. There's a lot of illusions, such like Symphonies for the Kids, of course, associated with Brian Wilson, in this book. Effortlessly and on an industrial scale, they could turn out a song of the caliber of Will You Love Me Tomorrow, Up on the Roof, Dadu Ron Ron, Be My Baby, Breaking Up Is Hard to Do, or The Locomotion, Every Week. Though the sounds emanated from several buildings in close proximity, the one most associated with this writer production setup was the Brill Building. Actually, it had a catchier name than 1650 Broadway, and it soon became shorthand for the sound of early 60s New York. Now, Al Cooper, the famous musician, he plays on Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan, and he discovered Leonard Skinner and produced the records, and I could say produced the Tubes, the first record, great record. He was associated with that scene, and if you read his autobiography, which is very good, he gets very shirty when people talk about the Brill Building, and he says, no, it was 1650 Broadway, But in any event, Broadway, the Great White Way, and apparently it's racist to refer to Broadway as the Great White Way now. It's referring to white lights, nothing to do with race, was already the heart of the entertainment industry when the original songwriting hothouse, the Brill Building, at 1619, was built in 1931. It was a handsome Art Deco creation of white brick and bronze, named after a company of haberdashers who owned the ground floor. Above them on the first floor had been the Paradise nightclub. The upper floors housed publishers, agents, promoters, and pluggers, the seamier end of showbiz. These interdependent businesses would meet and they would sell songs, cut deals, make and break records in a restaurant called the Turf at the base of the building. The Turf was fitted with 20 phone booths for industry types working their way up, not yet successful enough to afford their own space, who had to make do with a standing room only office. By 1962, the Brill Building housed 165 different music companies. Those with less money to splash on looking flash, like Don Kirshner, settled for cheaper accommodation on the stretch between 49th and 53rd Streets. The Brill Building sound also emanated from 1674, 1697, and Alden's home at 1650. Writer Tony Wine, A Groovy Kind of Love, Black Pearl, Knock 3 Times, was just 14 when she started working for Alden. You'd walk in and there was just music in every elevator, in the lobby, everywhere you walked, she said. A lot of chaff was created, but no one has yet come up with a better, more reliable way of creating classic modern pop. That is vertical integration. In the little more than half a decade that made up the Brill Building era, the artists, that is the writers, producers, and arrangers, could write freely about the pains and pressures of growing up without the need to publicly front the agonies and ecstasies of their music. Hits came out of the Brill Building through sheer hard work, writing to deadlines, rewriting, rearranging, sweat and toil. Unlike rock and roll's Southern Wild Band, Brill Building staffers weren't known for their carnal threat, heavy boozing, or opulent jewelry. They went to the office, wore ties, wrote hits. To early rock and roll aesthetes like Nick Cohen, this was tantamount to cheating. He snarkily labeled it high school. The manufacturing of this music, which was no different from the creation of a standard, like It Never Entered My Mind, written by Rodgers and Hart and arranged by Nelson Riddle, sung by Frank Sinatra, also added to the snob feeling among students and beatniks, which led them to ignore modern pop entirely in the early 60s and leaned instead towards Dixieland or trad jazz in Britain and folk in America. Bob Dylan, in one of his more spiteful and less acute moments, ridiculed Brill Building songs as You Love Me, I Love You, Ooby Dooby Doo. I would have to say that Bob Dylan certainly wrote several songs as good as Goffin and King's Will You Love Me Tomorrow, but I don't think Bob Dylan ever wrote a song, a popular song, as good as Will You Love Me Tomorrow. There are very few popular songs better than that one. Jerry Lieber and Mark Stoller were godfathers of this new post-rock and roll writer, producer, pop, and their best songs alone, ribald, self-produced with comic theatricality, were a solid defense against Dylan's low blows. Lieber and Stoller were East Coast Jewish wise guys with a taste for blues and boogie-woogie who had met when both of their families relocated to California in the late 40s. They were also pop snobs of the highest order, finding the music of their forebears in contemporary white America to be sappy and sexless. Early on, they had written lurid jump blues pieces with titles like Fast Woman and Slow Gin, but broke through with Big Mama Thornton's Hound Dog, an R&B number one in 1952. They initially frowned on rock and roll, but weren't complaining when Hound Dog was covered by Elvis in 56 and made them wealthy. That's a funny thing. This often happens in popular music. You know, Bobby Troop, who's mentioned here, what was he in that show, Emergency? He wrote a song called Route 66. Bobby Troop considers himself to be a jazz man, and then the Rolling Stones and a whole bunch of others covered Route 66, and Bobby Troop would always shake his fist against the desecration of his music. Yeah, I wonder he thought that when all those royalty checks started coming in. And there's a famous story about the Rolling Stones, who, of course, they get their own chapter in the book. Bobby Womack, he gets a look in too, particularly how he managed to marry Sam Cooke's widow very shortly after Sam Cooke had been murdered, which led to speculation from then till now that Bobby Womack had something to do with Sam Cooke's murder. Of course, Bobby Womack, a tremendously talented man in his own right. But yeah, it's all over now by Bobby Womack, and his sister gets a credit. So the story goes that when Bobby Womack found out that the Rolling Stones had covered It's All Over Now, he was furious. And then he got his first royalty check, and he said, Mick Jagger can cover any of my songs he wants. I'd have to say that Bob Stanley has a great deal of love for the English eccentric tradition. And, well, someone who's become a huge cult figure in the last couple of decades is Joe Meek. And Bob Stanley considers Joe Meek to be the first record producer as opposed to record recorder because he manipulated every aspect of the records that he made. Joe Meek was, how shall I put this? He was a homosexual, a predatory homosexual, an off-the-charts nutter, and an actual murderer. But if you hear a song like the Honeycombs, Have I the Right, which was not Mersey Beat, it was one of his last hits, which is an absolutely remarkable recording, one of the most exciting records ever made, then you understand the praise that Bob Stanley awards to him. This is a long book, as I said, and so I've given you a taste of it. Again, encyclopedic knowledge of popular music, an appreciation of sociology, one could say, as well, highly developed critical thinking, and a nice prose style. If you like popular music, particularly British popular music, you will love this book. So those are my thoughts on Bob Stanley's Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. Let's have a final look at the chat. Here we go. Elvis, I hear, was a very generous man, too. Stanley relates that Bill Cosby was visiting him, and he disappeared or whatever, and Elvis got very angry, disrespect, Yeah, he took care of all his friends, the Memphis Mafia. Those people sucked the blood out of him. But I guess they were a buffer against the Colonel, who took 50% of his earnings and stole a lot on top as well. I love the Elvis American trilogy. It makes me feel cool, says Oscar Toe. It's one of the saddest things about Elvis was that, so he makes these terrible movies. He gets back from the army, and it's just terrible movie, and slapdash soundtracks. And so a special was mooted in 1968. And so the network decides there's this young guy named Steve Binder, and they want him to do it. And the Colonel wanted Elvis to do a bunch of sappy Christmas songs and terrible settings. And Elvis puts his foot down and says, "No, I'm going to make this." And he loses weight and he dresses in black leather, and it re-electrified his career. And then Elvis says, "I'm going to make music in Memphis with Chips Moman, and I'm not having RCA dominate the song writing selection. And yes, they're going to use the musicians that have made all those, soul music hits." And then, he makes an album and a half of great music. And then he just couldn't resist the Colonel any longer. And that was pretty much it for Elvis. Don Willis, Elvis or Sting? I mean, both are geniuses. Quote attributed to Billy Graham. Yes, the comeback special, or the singer special, as some people call it. What else do we have here? Oh, what? Metal Mike? Well, thank you for tuning in. Joe Strummer died 19 years ago today. He was my idol. I was hysterical, crying, and will never forgive my parents for not letting me go see him play 2 months before he died. They said I was too young, says Lamprey Milk. Bobby Troop, the one who married the great Julie London. It says Anne Run. Julie London was a fine singer and a beautiful woman. She could not act. It was just embarrassing watching her on that show, Emergency. Okay. Oh, yes. His final movie was called, had Habit in it, like a nun's habit. And it had Mary Tyler Moore in it. Change of Habit. Yes. He took acting very seriously, said a British American. Yeah, he was working with great directors at the beginning. I still get Chronicles and the Claremont Review, says Metal Mike. Oh, and I get the Epoch Times as well. Fauci runs in fear when Elvis's teddy bear comes on, says Oscar Toe. Metal Mike says, I canceled American Conservative. Oh, I have added the Dorchester Review. I have appeared in that magazine twice, actually. Okay. Let's see. I think that's it for today. I have to bounce, as the kids are saying. What is coming up on the show? Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be talking about a TV episode from 1981, the SCTV Christmas special. The first one, which I will assert, is the greatest single hour of television, certainly the funniest in history. And on Friday, which is Christmas Eve, I am going to be reading a short story by Willa Cather called The Burglar's Christmas. And I was hoping that, since it's Christmas Eve, to the extent that anyone actually, tunes in, because, they probably have more important things to do. I thought maybe we could keep the conversation light, maybe chat amongst ourselves, perhaps. Let me know what you think of that in the chat tomorrow. And coming up on Music Monday, next Monday, and the date of that is December the 27th. I'm going to talk about one of my very favorite records, which is called The Kinks Are the Village Green Preservation Society, which is a record that came out in 1968 and included a paean to the George Cross and Virginity. That is to say, it was a record very much out of step with its times. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why it remains beloved. Thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization, which is a bad thing, despite what the New York Times has to say, and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.